Share my bed and undress. The lonely cowboy demand to the giant cowgirl on a snowbound night. Witness this unbelievable, true-inspired story right here on Whisper of the Past. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share where you're watching from. Let's get started. Share my bed and undress. The lonely cowboy demand to the giant cowgirl on a snowbound night. Share my bed and undress. The words exploded from Caleb Thornwright's mouth, not as seduction, but as a survival command to the towering stranger bleeding on his floor. The lonely cowboy hadn't spoken to another human in 3 months. Hadn't wanted to, hadn't needed to. But now this giant cowgirl, Rena Blackwood, stood 6 feet tall in his one-room shack, ice crystallizing in her dark hair, hypothermia stealing the color from her lips, and death creeping closer with every snowbound second. Caleb knew the signs, the violent shaking, the white fingers, the glazed confusion in her eyes. He'd seen men die from less on nights like this, 40 below and dropping, the blizzard screaming like a living thing trying to claw through his walls. His single narrow bed was the only warm place left in the world, and shared body heat was the only thing standing between this magnificent, stubborn woman and a frozen grave by morning. But Rena Blackwood wasn't the type of cowgirl to take orders from any man, especially not a demand to share his bed and undress on a snowbound night from a hermit she'd never met. She'd survived being thrown from her horse, survived the worst blizzard in 20 years, survived a lifetime of men who feared her strength and mocked her size. "I don't need your help," she said through chattering teeth, even as blood dripped from the gash on her forehead onto his rough wooden floor, even as her knees buckled and Caleb had to catch her before she collapsed completely. Her body was ice against his hands, solid ice, like holding a woman carved from frozen stone. "Yes, you do," Caleb said, his voice harder than he intended, rougher than it should be. But he'd forgotten how to be gentle. 2 years of living alone in the Wyoming mountains had scraped away everything soft in him, left him with only the brutal edges of a man who'd buried his wife and baby girl, and decided the world could go to hell without him. He dragged Rena toward the potbelly stove in the corner, practically carrying her weight. She was tall, taller than most men he knew, and strong. But right now she was dead weight in his arms, her body shutting down, her mind fogging over. "My horses," she mumbled, trying to pull away from him. "I have to. Your horses are in my barn. They'll live." "You won't if you don't listen to me." Caleb pushed her down onto the only chair in the shack, knelt in front of her, and started unlacing her frozen boots. His fingers worked fast, efficient, trying not to think about the fact that he was undressing a woman he'd met 5 minutes ago, trying not to remember the last time he'd unlaced boots for someone. Martha, his wife, the night before the fever took her. Rena jerked her foot back. "Don't touch me. Your boots are frozen solid. You can't feel your toes, can you?" She didn't answer, which was answer enough. Caleb pulled off her first boot. Her foot was white, the skin waxy and deadly-looking. Frostbite was setting in. He'd seen it before on cattle, on horses, on men stupid enough to think they could outrun a Wyoming blizzard. "Listen to me," he said, looking up at her face. Even half frozen and bleeding, she was striking. Not pretty. In the delicate way Martha had been, but powerful, like a force of nature barely contained in human skin. "Your core temperature has dropped too low. Those wet clothes are going to kill you. The stove isn't enough. You need direct body heat or you'll be dead by morning." "That's not a threat. That's just the truth." "So, what are you saying?" Rena asked, even though she knew, even though the words were right there between them, sharp and dangerous. "I'm saying you need to get out of those clothes, wrap yourself in every blanket I own, and get into that bed." Caleb pointed to the narrow cot in the corner. "Barely big enough for one person, definitely not big enough for two. And when the temperature drops tonight, and it will drop below 40, maybe lower, I'm getting in that bed with you, because shared body heat is the only thing that's going to keep us both alive." The wind howled outside, shaking the walls, making the lamp flicker. Snow hissed against the windows like a living thing trying to get in. Rena stared at him, her dark eyes trying to focus, trying to read whether this man was her salvation or her worst mistake. "You're insane." "I'm practical." Caleb stood, moved to his trunk and pulled out dry clothes. His clothes too big for most men, probably close to fitting her. "I'll turn around. You change, but you need to do it now, Rena. Not in 5 minutes. Not when you feel ready. Now, how do you know my name? You told me when you fell through my door. You probably don't remember." She didn't. Her memory of the last hour was fragments. The storm coming out of nowhere, her horse panicking, the crack of her head against rock, the desperate stumble through white blindness toward a light that might have been real or might have been death calling her home. Caleb turned his back, stared at the wall, listened to the sounds of her struggling behind him, the rustle of frozen fabric, a gasp of pain, a muffled sob she tried to swallow. "I can't," she finally said, her voice small and broken in a way that made something crack open in Caleb's chest. "My fingers won't work. I can't get the buttons." Caleb closed his eyes, took a breath, turned around. Rena sat in the chair, her coat half off, her shirt still buttoned, her hands shaking so badly she couldn't grip anything. Tears streaked down, her face tears of frustration, of fear, of the horrible vulnerability of needing help from a stranger. "Let me," Caleb said quietly. "No, Rena, let me help you or you die. Those are the only 2 options." She looked at him for a long moment, searching his face for something. Decency maybe, or trustworthiness, or just the absence of cruelty. Whatever she found, it was enough. She nodded. Caleb knelt in front of her again and started unbuttoning her shirt with hands that weren't quite steady. He kept his eyes on the buttons, not on her skin, not on the curves of her body being revealed inch by inch. This was survival, nothing more. He had to keep telling himself that. But when he pulled the wet fabric away from her shoulders and saw how badly she was shaking, how her lips had gone from blue to almost purple, something fierce and protective surged up in him. The same instinct that had made him a good husband once, a good father before everything was ripped away. He dressed her in his dry shirt, helped her into his pants that she had to roll up 3 times at the ankles, wrapped her in blankets until she looked like a bundle of wool with just her face showing. Then he picked her up and she was heavy, solid, real, and carried her to his bed. "I can walk," she protested weakly. "No, you can't." He laid her down, tucked the blankets tight around her, moved to the stove to add more wood. The fire roared to life, throwing dancing shadows across the walls. Outside, the storm screamed louder, as if angry that its prey had escaped. Caleb made coffee strong and bitter and held the cup to Rena's lips. "Drink," she drank, coughing at the heat, at the harsh taste. But color was slowly coming back to her face. Her shaking was lessening. She was going to live through the next hour at least. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me yet. The hard part comes later." "What hard part?" Caleb looked at the bed, the single narrow bed, then at the windows where frost was already crawling across the glass, even with the fire burning. "When the temperature drops, and that stove can't keep up anymore, when I have to keep my word about sharing that bed with you, that's when you'll find out what kind of man I really am." Rena's eyes widened slightly. Fear flickered across her face. Then something else, calculation maybe, or acceptance of the impossible situation they were both trapped in. "What kind of man are you?" she asked. Caleb was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire, seeing ghosts in the flames. "I guess we're both about to find out." The temperature kept dropping. Caleb watched the frost creep further across the windows, thick and white and unstoppable, like death's fingers reaching into his small sanctuary. He'd lived through 3 winters in this lion's shack, survived storms that would have killed softer men. But tonight felt different. Tonight he wasn't alone, and that changed everything. Rena had fallen into an exhausted half-sleep, her body finally warming enough that the violent shaking had stopped. But Caleb could see her breath misting in the air now, could feel the cold seeping through the floorboards despite the roaring fire. The stove was losing its battle against the blizzard. He sat at his rough table drinking coffee that had gone cold, watching this stranger sleep in his bed. She'd thrown one arm out from under the blankets, and even in sleep, her hand was curled into her fist like she was still fighting something. Her dark hair had dried into wild waves across his pillow. Blood had crusted on her temple where she'd hit her head, a dark reminder of how close she'd come to dying out there. Caleb wondered what her story was, why a woman was traveling alone through mountain passes in December, why she looked at him with that mix of defiance and loneliness he recognized because he saw it in his own reflection every morning. Why, when he'd caught her, when his hands had gripped her arms to keep her from falling, something had jolted through him like lightning, something he thought had died with Martha. The wind slammed against the shack so hard the walls groaned. The lamp flickered. Rena's eyes snapped open, wild and disoriented. "It's okay," Caleb said quickly, moving to the bedside. "You're safe." Just the storm where she tried to sit up winced, touched her head. Her fingers came away with dried blood. "All right. How do you feel?" "Like I got thrown from a horse and hit my head on a rock." She looked at him, really looked at him for the first time since she'd arrived. In the lamplight, Caleb could see her taking in his details. The weathered face that looked older than his 34 years. The beard he hadn't trimmed in months. The eyes that had seen too much loss. "You didn't have to help me." "Yes, I did. Most men would have turned me away. Big woman like me showing up out of nowhere demanding shelter. I didn't turn you away because I'm not most men. And I didn't demand." Caleb stopped, shook his head. "Actually, I did demand. I demanded you share my bed and undress. That's not exactly the action of a gentleman, no." René agreed. "But it might be the action of a man who's seen people die and doesn't want to see it again." The words hit Caleb like a fist to the chest. He turned away, moved back to the stove, added more wood even though the fire didn't need it. "My wife and daughter died 2 years ago. Cholera. I watched them suffer for 3 days and couldn't do anything except hold their hands and lie about them getting better." He hadn't meant to say it. Hadn't spoken those words out loud to another human being since the day he buried them. But something about this woman, about the storm, about the intimacy of this small space, made the truth spill out. "I'm sorry," René said softly. "That's why you live up here alone." "That's why I live up here alone." Caleb turned back to face her. "I couldn't stand people's pity. Couldn't stand going to town and seeing women who looked like Martha, children who looked like Emma. Couldn't stand being the tragic widower everyone whispered about. So I came up here where nobody could find me, where I could just stop. Stop what? Feeling, wanting, hoping, all the things that hurt when they're ripped away." René was quiet for a moment, her dark eyes studying him with an intensity that made him want to look away. "I know what that's like. Not the losing someone part. I've been alone since I was 12, since Comanche raiders killed my family. But I know what it's like to stop hoping. To decide you're better off with walls around your heart than risking anyone getting close enough to hurt you. Is that why you were traveling alone in a blizzard? I'm a horse trader. I buy and sell, break the wild ones, train the stubborn ones. I'm good at it, better than most men, which means most men either hate me for it or want to." She stopped, her jaw tightening. "It doesn't matter. Point is, I'm used to traveling alone. Used to taking care of myself, used to not needing anyone. But you needed me tonight. Yeah, the admission seemed to cost her something. I needed you tonight and I hate that." Caleb almost smiled. "You hate being saved. I hate being weak. I'm 6 feet tall, stronger than most men I meet, and I've made a life out of not depending on anyone. Then I get thrown from a horse, hit my head, and suddenly I can't even unbutton my own shirt." Her voice cracked slightly. "You had to undress me like I was a child. You had to carry me. I had to keep you alive," Caleb interrupted. "That's not weakness, René. That's just being human. We all need help sometimes, even the strongest of us. Do you ever need help?" The question hung in the cold air between them. Caleb thought about lying, about maintaining the image of the self-sufficient mountain man who needed nothing from nobody. But something about her raw honesty demanded the same in return. "Every damn day," he admitted. "I need help every day. I'm just too stubborn and too scared to ask for it." The wind howled again, and this time they both felt the temperature drop noticeably. The fire was roaring, but it wasn't enough anymore. The cold was winning. Caleb looked at the bed, at René wrapped in his blankets, then at the floor where he'd planned to sleep. He knew what was coming. Knew what had to happen, but the knowing didn't make it easier. "It's getting colder," Rena said quietly. She'd noticed, too. "Yeah, you said earlier that you'd have to share the bed. That body heat was the only thing that would keep us alive." She paused. "Were you telling the truth, or was that just I was telling the truth? In about an hour, maybe less. That stove won't be enough. The wind cuts right through these walls. I've woken up with ice on the inside of the windows before, frost on my blankets. Tonight's worse than I've ever seen. So what do we do?" Caleb met her eyes. "I keep my word. I share my bed with you, but I need you to understand something first. I'm not going to hurt you. I'm not going to touch you in any way, except what's necessary for survival. This isn't about anything except staying alive until morning. I know that, do you? Because I'm a stranger who demanded you undress and share my bed. That's not exactly a situation that inspires trust." Rena sat up slowly, keeping the blankets wrapped around her. "You're right. I don't know. You don't know if you're decent or dangerous. But you know what? I don't have a choice. Neither of us do. So we can spend the next hour worrying about what might happen. Or we can just accept that sometimes survival makes you do things you never thought you'd do with people you never thought you'd meet." She was right. Caleb knew she was right. But that didn't make his heart pound any less hard at the thought of climbing into that narrow bed with her, of pressing his body against hers, of being that close to another human being after 2 years of touching no one. The lamp flickered again, and in that moment of dimness, Caleb saw something flash across Rena's face. Not fear exactly, but vulnerability. The same vulnerability he felt. "I'm scared," she said suddenly. "Not of you. Not of the storm. I'm scared of..." She stopped, shook her head. "Never mind." "Scared of what?" Caleb asked, moving closer to the bed. "Of wanting this." The words came out in a rush, like she'd been holding them back, and they'd finally broken free. "Of wanting to not be alone for one night. Of wanting someone to hold me, even if it's just for survival, even if it means nothing. I've been alone so long, I forgot what it feels like to have another person's warmth next to you. To hear someone breathing beside you in the dark. And I'm scared that once I remember, I won't be able to go back to being alone." Caleb understood that fear. Understood it so deeply it hurt. "Me too," he said quietly. "I'm scared of the same thing." They looked at each other across the small distance between them. Two lonely people caught in a storm, about to cross a line that couldn't be uncrossed. "The temperature's dropping," Caleb said. "I can feel it, I know. I'm going to blow out the lamp, bank the fire, and get in that bed with you. I'll stay on top of the blankets if you want." "No." Rena's voice was steady now, decided. "If we're doing this, we do it right. You get under the blankets. We share the warmth. We survive the night. And in the morning, we figure out what happens next." Caleb nodded. His throat felt tight. He moved around the small shack, preparing for the long, cold night ahead, banking the fire so it would last, blowing out the lamp, stripping down to his union suit. In the darkness, he could hear Rena shifting in the bed, making room for him. When he finally climbed in beside her, the bed was so narrow, their bodies immediately pressed together. He could feel her warmth through the thin fabric of their clothes, could smell sage and leather and something uniquely her. His heart was hammering so hard he was sure she could hear it. "Is this okay?" he asked, his voice rough. "It has to be," Rena answered. But then she did something unexpected. She turned in his arms so her back was pressed against his chest, and she took his hand and placed it over her heart. He could feel it beating just as hard as his own. "We're both terrified," she